Hey everybody, this is Dan, and I thought this time I would do a quick screen recording so I can show you one of my other Nuke tools that I created recently. Normally I would just write this up, but it's a little more complicated to explain via writing, so I figured I'd just show you how it works. Here's our shot. You saw this from the quick grade demo that I posted the other day. Again, I do have quick grade on here. This is a log clip. For doing the screen comps, I created a tool set to speed things up because I had to do, I don't know, probably 10 of these a day for about a week, and it just was not feasible to do each and every one of them by hand. So we have our two read notes. We've got our plate, we've got our graphic. We want to slap these together. So what we will do is load the tool set called R Screen Comp, which I have created. And when it comes in, it looks like this, nice and small. It's got everything we need to comp this quickly. On the right here, we've got a pipe to connect to our plate, and over here we've got a switch node to connect to our graphic. The reason it's a switch node is, like I said, the majority of these shots had two images that would be switched on and off, like on the tap of a screen icon. So this was just a quick way to go from one to the other. Obviously, when we got to final, this would be a more complex animation, so the switch node would usually disappear. So let's jump down here and take a look at our final node, and we look at this and it looks terrible. It's nowhere near where it's supposed to be. Now all of this hinges around the tracker node. Everything is parented via expression linking, and once we get this tracker node dialed in, everything will just sort of fall into place for us. So let me open that up and we'll go full screen here. There we go. And I will turn my overlays on. Now you see by default the tracker has some data in it. That's because this was copied and pasted and created from a toolset. So we'll just select all these and click delete tracks, and now we've got nothing on our screen. We have the add tracker tool selected over here, and I'm just going to go and add them in on our device. I'll back up to a frame where we can see all the corners. Now if you're familiar with Nuke, you know that the corner pin nodes and trackers count by bottom left is 1, bottom right is 2, 3, 4, etc. So I'll add them in that order. That is important. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And boom, look at that. We've got stuff happening. And over here you can see I can dial these in a little bit closer to where they were actually supposed to be, which is a great feature in Nuke, which they recently added. Alright, so we've got our first frame pretty much dialed in. I close that and we look at it. What the hell is happening with our graphic? Well, this is part of our parented corner pin. If I come down over here and take a look at our corner pin, we've got corner pin. This is all expression linked, as you can see by the blue. If we go to from and click, well, you can see right here the dimensions of what it was assuming the input graphic was is actually an iPad graphic. So if I click set to input, it will reset itself based on the graphic that is currently inside it. And now we have a rough composite. It's actually not terrible, especially considering we clicked, what, 6 buttons? Now the way I would go about setting this up, once I have this in, obviously we have to track things still, but once my tracker is set roughly where I think the edges of the screen are and what the tracker will base it off of, so I use the from here to extend our plate out. If you take a look at the corners, let's take a look down here, to cover up any potential gaps. Make sure this is perfectly lined up. Up here we need to go up, and of course this is negative. Take it down to move it up because this is the from tab. So a little bit of adjusting there. We'll come back to that later. And you can also see this has a key slapped on top of it. Now obviously the graphic is moving because we haven't tracked it in yet, but for falling off the truck, this is pretty damn close to something that might work. Let's walk through this step by step, what we've got here. This is our spill suppression. We're using a roto node to restrict the spill suppression only to the screen area. This is, again, expression linked to the tracker, so if I open this up, you can see the red outline is exactly where our screen is because that is where we placed our tracker. If we take a look at just this, if we take a look at just the merge here after our despill, you can see the spill suppression that was happening, and this is, again, by default. We can tweak this as necessary. Also, over here underneath the saturation, this being the spill suppression area, is a great place to add a grade node if you need to color adjust the spill coming off of it. So if you actually want the spill to reflect onto the finger, which in many instances you may, you can come in here and dial this up, and that spill will actually match whatever graphic you're putting on the screen. Again, that's not in there by default, but as a compositor, you can put that in as necessary. So if we come back to our first frame, which is where we have the actual tracker, really at this point all that we have to do is track all 4 of these trackers and make sure that the track is really good and dead on. And once we've done that, the screen comp will be in and ready to go. And of course, this being a demo, I smartly did that already. So we'll take a look at this one over here, and I will show you that our screen is tracked in, and look at that. All I did is use this tracker node and track all 4 corners. Obviously when the thumb comes over top track point 2 here, there's a little bit of manual animation. Again, this is not the final product that we shipped, of course, because this is not perfect still, but it's pretty damn good, all things considering. All I did was track 4 corners of a screen, and this is what I've got. Now I want to show you a few other features of the toolset. So over here is our keyer. This is the setup for putting your thumb over top of the screen. If it's a shot where you don't have anyone interacting with the screen, it's just sort of a holding shot where somebody's just looking at the device, you can easily just turn that merge off. You can delete all these, whatever you need to do. We have a light wrap that wraps the graphic back over top the plate here. Again, if nobody is tapping, feel free to turn that off, save yourself some processing. But for the most part, you can see what's going on here. We've got our graphic, corner pinned, saturation adjustment, a soften, pre-multiplied. We have a defocus that's turned off by default. In rare instances where you're doing a screen comp, sometimes the device itself is actually out of focus, or you need to do partially out of focus. That's what this is here for, just to toggle on and off as I saw fit. Motion blur. Motion blur is always important, and this again is linked to the tracker. So once we've tracked all 4 points, we turn on the transform. Now the corner pin is linked to the 4 points specifically. It is not linked to the transform tab, but the reason the transform tab has information in it and set to match move is to get the average motion of the screen and use that as the motion blur to apply to the graphic. So however the screen moves in the plate, which in this case is pretty minimal, that information will be translated into the tracker node here and used to motion blur the graphic to match the movement. Very important in some instances. Here, not so much because it's pretty minimal. But again, if you needed to do anything with that, you can ramp the motion blur up and down as needed. Very helpful. We have our grain down here. This grain is built to match the Alexa log footage that I was primarily working with. You can feel free to delete that and toss your own in. Goes in between the unpremult and the premult. And then that is merged on top of the plate. And here's what it looks like without the key. Not bad, all things considered. It needs some color correction for sure, and that typically happens up here. I would toss them in before the premult, where we do our color work. And then this one that's turned off here, this is another optional piece which was used for reflection in some instances. So in some shots, there was a lot of variation on the screen or finger reflections or what have you. So I would turn this on, and it's a simple over set to 0.04, and you would think, why the hell would you want to do that? Because you're just plussing the old garbage back on top. But in some instances, if you take a look at this, I would oftentimes add a grade node after this shuffle and just crank on it real hard to get the contrast and the differentiation in the reflection, because by default you can't really see what's going on, and I can add this back in later. So I would add a whole hell of a lot of contrast to this so I could get whatever reflection was occurring at any given point, you can see a little bit of stuff's going on in here that could be useful to add back on top of the plate. So, balancing this with a grade note and then come back down here to the over, you can see what the difference is before and after. So if I turn that on and off, you get a little bit more. Obviously, I would never do this with a shot that has these plus tracking markers because that's a pain in the ass. So sometimes, camera folk, it's better to turn those off and just use a straight green image. The tracking markers don't really help that much in this instance. But you see, you can get a little bit of the variation of the reflection coming in throughout the shot. And up top here, you can see, subtle differences across the phone. Can be handy. By default, it's turned off. Again, the grade note is really just to creatively push the reflection around wherever you want. But by default, we have our keyer. So come over here and I will show you one hack that I used. Now, you'll look at this and you'll see, okay, the key's not terrible here, but around the edges of the phone, it's got a fringe that is really kind of distracting and annoying. And yes, to show you that it is coming from the key, I will toggle the merge. I'm talking about this line right here on the top. That kind of crap is something you can adjust out in the key, but in doing so, you will most likely screw up the key for the thumb. So to be perfectly honest with you, since most of these shots were pretty short, this is a second or two, what I typically do is after we're copying the alpha channel back in, I will throw in a rotopaint node set to alpha and turn the alpha down to 0, and I will paint away the edges, which sounds like an annoying manual process, but considering that getting this thumb key correct is the more important part, this paint out really takes maybe 2 minutes per shot, and that 2 minutes of quick manual labor is much preferable to trying to find a key that works for both the thumb and the screen. So I say screw it most of the time, and I just paint that out and move on with my life, which I suggest you do too if that is something that you're struggling with. So quick on and off, you can see how that affects the edge. We're just painting black alpha on top of it right before the pre-mul. And then, obviously we would do that for every frame. We have ostensibly a finished composite. Now, like I said, you can tweak the color correction as needed, but the great thing about this is, you drop it in, the key mostly works. In some instances, you'll have to adjust it. All you really have to do, there you go, all you have to do is set your tracker up properly and make sure this track is dead on to the device, and everything will fall into place for you. And once you have changes or you need to improve the animation, let's say a new version of the software comes out, boom, you swap your input on this read note, this shuffle over here, and like that, everything is tracked back in. If this was by some chance a different shape, let me create a checkerboard here that is, sure, some random ass shape, and drop that in. That's not going to fit properly, but I can come down here to my corner pin and click set to input, and now that entire image is crammed into that device. Obviously the aspect ratio is incorrect, but with 2 clicks I got something, a different image of a different size, dropped back in and tracked properly. And again, everything works just great. Another reason that I use tool sets, because tools need to be added and removed on a per shot basis. This is definitely one of those instances. This setup is great. It would not work as a gizmo where things are pre-built for you. So I set it up like this, and as long as you understand that the read node for the plate gets piped in here, you set up your tracker, which is linked to everything else, and you drop your graphic in here, you will be golden and finishing your work much more quickly than folks who are trying to build this from scratch. So hopefully these screen comp tools are useful to you. Feel free to download, use them however you like, modify them, tell me if there's something wrong with it. This version of the toolset that I'm posting is for standard video files, Rec 709 stuff, not log. I figured you didn't want my log version as the default version of this toolset, but really it's no different. The only difference is the color correction nodes that I would toss in over here on the plate just really desaturate and remove contrast to match the log plate, and then I use the input process with my quick grade, as I mentioned in the previous post, to see what I'm doing. But everything is the same in terms of the tools. Anyway, if you do a lot of screen compositing, hopefully this toolset will help you out and speed things along for you. Good luck and happy compositing!